Canon's 50th birthday was the most important date of Canon's history because that day they unveiled the electro-optical system, March the 1st, 1987, in honor of their 50th anniversary. What is the electro-optical system, you might be thinking? Some of you know the answer, but most of you don't. It's actually EOS.
The ultimate autofocus SLR.
So fast and easy.
High performance autofocus with any Canon EF lens. Great shots were never
So simple.
EOS, new from Canon. Buy EOS today.
Or it's actually the meaning of EOS. EOS, which you see on the straps, you see on the cameras, you see in the titles of the cameras, it's that important, not just to Canon's history, but to camera history in general. Not only did it usher in the EOS lineup of cameras that were fully electronic, it also ushered in the world famous, the legendary Canon EF mount. Canon's EF mount is so popular even to this day that you have camera companies that want to adapt just for Canon EF mounts. Matter of fact, I didn't get into the Sony Alpha system until I knew that you could adapt Canon EF glass to the Sony Alpha system. That's how important Canon EF mount glass is. It's probably the largest family of lenses that you can find on the market today, which means you can get cheaper lenses, so on and so forth. You have third parties that are creating lenses just for this lens mount to get in the Canon family. And you just throw a Canon body on there and you're in a different world. Even Canon's close competitor for almost 100 years, Nikon, couldn't keep up. There was nothing like having a fully automatic or fully electronic camera that went along with a fully electronic lens mount. And that lens mount is so important because it ushered in and birthed the lens that we're going to talk about today. And the lens that we're going to talk about today is the Magic Drain Pipe, aka the Canon 80-200 2.8L lens. This lens is very important to me because when I actually went into Canon's new mount, the RF mount, I was thinking about cheaper options just so I wouldn't have to pay the extreme Lexus tax, if you will, on Canon lenses. Yes, Canon makes some of the best lenses in the world even to this day, but they have a tax. You have the Canon tax for what they did in 1987 by unveiling the EOS optical system. They are now pretty much overcharging their RF system for their new mirrorless cameras, and I don't think it's fair. That's why I go back in time to the old EF mount and I adapt it to my new RF system, utilizing this new Canon 80-200. What's up, you guys? I'm Devin with Century FX Studios, and today we're going to be pinning the 80-200 against the 70-200, but it will look so much better with a model. Today we're featuring the beautiful model, Kay Brooks, and she will be our test subject for the Canon 70-200 RF L lens against the Canon 80-200 EF L lens.
Right here we have the Canon 80-200 from the 1980s, valued at around $600. I would say it has a little bit more weight to it than the Canon 70-200 that is more recent today and valued at over $2,000.
The 80-200 is like an old guy that's stuck in his ways that doesn't want to change. But when you adapt this to a Canon EOS R5 or any pro level mirrorless body, you will get benefits and features that you didn't before. It's kind of like putting a turbo on an old car, but there are caveats. You get IBUS, but the lens is heavier, so reciprocal rule, you want to make sure you stay with that. Frame rate is better, but you get less than the RF lenses. The autofocus is leagues better, but it's not as good as an RF lens on an RF body, so it acts more like a third-party lens like a Sigma or a Tamron, where when you focus on the eye, it actually front focuses on the eyelash, which is not half bad, and it makes sense considering the focus motor. Now, the zoom is designed for photos. You can use your electronic shutter with this lens, so that means you get that faster frame rate there. The focusing is better designed for photos as well, so nothing smooth. And with the zoom, you also don't get anything smooth. It's a bit more jittery due to the focus engine and all the things inside of it. It focuses slower than some lenses, but it's not that bad for an old motor. You can't put any teleconverters on this because the real optical element comes so close to the actual sensor. Now, if you attach this to a crop frame sensor, it becomes a 128 to 320, but I wouldn't use this on an EF crop body, and I wouldn't use this on most RF crop bodies because the EF crop bodies don't have as many features to autofocus, especially if you have a cheaper EF crop body. Same thing that goes with the RF crop bodies. You don't have as many features as we just talked about with the R5 and an R3 and a Pro mirrorless body, so I would not put this on a mirrorless body thinking I'm going to get the same features that amplified this lens from its older days. You could lose things like high frame rate. You could lose things like IBUS with these RF crop bodies, depending on which ones you get. Now, like Canon always does, it always strips out a lot of features from the crop frame bodies and just gives you bare bones image quality pretty much with a lot of crop frame bodies. And most of the features of the crop frame bodies for the RF mount really comes in the video. So you need to think about that when you're utilizing this lens. Also, the new features like burst rate and all these other new features that you get from crop frame sensor mirrorless bodies, they don't really work well on this older lens. So this is where it gets quirky and the old guy is staying in his own lane. So let's unleash this 70-200 RF L lens. You're going to get my initial thoughts. This is my second time opening in the bag. I grabbed it once, but we're going to grab it a second time and really go through the paces and attach it to the camera. This thing is small. It almost seems as if the buttons on the side are more compact. It almost seems like the zoom ring is more compact than the original 70-200s back in the EF days. And this can really all fit in my one hand. Like I can cover it with my entire hand. And this is all zoomed in because, you know, the design of this lens, it's all, it extends. It's not all inside of the lens. So it extends when you zoom out, and I'm gonna take off the cover here and attach it to my camera. That weighs really nicely on the R5. Yes, it does have a lock on it, so I have to unlock it. My previous 70-200 did not have a lock on it. I had the 70-200 version 1 with the IS on it. And that is a smooth zoom ring. I really like that zoom ring. Smooth zoom ring, nothing stopping. And this is a virtually new copy that's used. It's from Lens Rentals. They didn't send it to me. I bought it with my own money, the rental. But this is a very consistent zoom, and I can really get used to this zoom. It is a little stiff, but it's not like stiff in inconvenient places. Just a tad bit stiff. I would assume that this would loosen up over time, especially since it's so stiff and it's not actually creeping on me. Lens creep is essentially when the lens is upside down and it starts to slide out on you. With lenses that don't zoom internally, they tend to creep down over time when the gears and stuff inside get weaker. But this is a nice solid lens to feel, and the compactness is amazing. The only thing I get worried about with these lenses that have openings on the inside when the lens protrudes is getting dust inside of it. Now, this is a somewhat of a used lens here. I can already see the wording from the RF7200 on the bezel here starting to fade, and if I pay somewhere around $2,500 for a lens, I don't want that to fade. But the original one's faded too, but just not this. Long story short, the 70-200 RF-L lens feels like a wider lens in my hand, as far as I'm opening my hand a lot more to hold it, but it's not as long and it doesn't weigh as much. As a matter of fact, it's probably the lightest weight 70-200 that I've ever held in my hands, but it's just wider and it feels substantial in my hands because I have to open my hand wider, but it does not translate to the actual weight of this product. Now, this RF-L lens has an RF control ring, which you can customize and tune it to your liking. And I was getting mad at the fact that it was so close to the body and it was so close to a tight area, and you have a lens collar that blocks you from being able to turn this RF control ring all the way like you should be. But I started to think to myself and started to think that the actual attributes that I would customize to this control ring would only be like shutter speed or exposure compensation, in which I probably wouldn't be using the entire throw. That means spinning the RF control ring all the way around. I'd probably be using like a quarter turn, like my pops told me. You wouldn't be turning that manual control ring or that RF control ring as much as you think. So you don't need that much space to actually turn it. You probably just, nudge it with your finger to get the exact settings that you want it to. So it's not that big of I agree with them, it's not that big of a downside or con. The reason why the RF control ring is so close and so tight is because the entire lens design is so tight. You would think that something that is so electronic would have to be closer to the body, so that makes sense. The zoom is really analog. It doesn't really do a lot of electronic information sending, and the focus ring is a little bit more electronic than the zoom ring because it sends a little bit more information about the focus, but at the end of the day, you definitely need that RF control ring in closer to the body because of the design. So it was kind of like a double-edged sword. They did it for the design. The design is lightweight and it has benefits, but at the end of the day, it's still tight trying to get into that RF-L control ring. When it comes to the 70-200 RF-L lens, I know that it weighs a lot better on the crop frame bodies and full frame bodies because it doesn't weigh that much, and the way the weight is distributed, it works well over a long period of time. But as far as the 80-200, the 80-200 is a little bit different. With the weight of this lens, I don't think it's going to balance well on any crop body. It's heavy throughout the entire lens. It's not front heavy, it's not back heavy, it's all heavy all the time, and it's very consistent throughout the entire lens. Really, if you're trying to get a lightweight solution, this is not it. But like I said, this is that old guy staying in its own lane, doing its own thing, because that's how they made them back in the day. Going back to autofocus, when using the RF 70-200, you get immediate feedback. As a matter of fact, the R5 itself will give you like this red and blue immediate switchback on the little AI servo box, because when servo AF is enacted, it automatically gets like real-time feedback from the lens, whereas the 80-200, it might lag for like a brief second as far as knowing whether or not it's confident enough that what you're trying to get in focus is actually in focus. So Ken Rockwell does an amazing job in telling you like simplistic words that'll give you a real feel for this lens. Pause this diagram and you can actually look through it. This little table will show you everything about the old 70-200s versus the 80-200, which is like the precursor for all of the 70-200s before it. It doesn't have the two most recent 70-200 versions on here, but this will give you a really good feel for if you're trying to go back in time and purchase and compare these old 70-200s to the 80-200 before. Let's get into an image quality test of the 80-200, aka the magic drain pipe, because it looked like the drain pipe and everybody thought that everything that came out of it was magical in the late 80s. First thing I want to talk about is the minimum focusing distance. So it is 5.9 feet, and that's probably the longest minimum focusing distance that you're going to find with a lens that's 70-200. All the other 70-200s that came after this, and this is not really 70-200 of course, but all the 70-200s that were based off of this lens definitely have a closer focusing distance. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And also, this is my first time doing lens charts tests. I'm trying to get into it a little bit more, trying to give you guys a more scientific test, but you know, take that with a grain of salt. Human error could have crept in here. So let's get right into it. Now, this is technically 85, or I wanted it to be 85, but technically it's 88. And then let's go in the middle of the image here. So this is a decent show of sharpness. I want to say 3.5 out of 5. And with the torturing of the 45 megapixel R5, you know, that's something to be said after 30 years. Let's go in the middle here. I do see some green fringing in the middle there, but let's go off to the edges here. And I see some ghosting here. It's not as contrasty, but the sharpness is it's okay. It's not as good as it was in the middle. And I see just the tiniest bit of green fringing, but that's a pretty good showing for what I like to call 85. Technically 88. Now let's go to 103, which is technically I wanted to be 105, but on the meter I couldn't get it quite right. Same thing as the last one, but let's just call this 105 because 105 is one of my favorite focal distances. So let's get into it. In the middle of the lens, it is okay. I'm seeing a little bit of green chromatic aberration start to creep in there. It didn't get too much less sharper, but it didn't get more sharper, if that makes sense to my eye. Let's go to the edges here. I'm seeing still a little bit of ghosting. I don't think it really cleared up. Ghosting was a big problem, and chromatic aberration was a big problem with lenses back in the day, but I'm just seeing ghosting. I'm not seeing as much chromatic aberration here. So that was a decent showing. It didn't really get much better, but it didn't get much worse either. All right, let's go to what I would like to call 135, but it came out to be 143. In the middle here, it almost looked like it missed focus. It loaded. Yeah, Lightroom says this is the maximum quality. So yeah, it looked like pretty much it's got a lot of green. It's just not sharp. I don't know if it's decentered or the optics are going bad or some of the things on the inside of the lens is going bad, but this is what you have to deal with when you have the lens this old. Canon won't fix it. You got to find some kind of miracle worker out there that knows how to do it. If you know how somebody who can do it, put it in the comments below so people can learn. But since this lens is so old, Canon won't fix it anymore. So you got to go to somebody that you trust or that you will trust to fix it. So if it does have this issue, like it's out of focus, but I know I nailed focus and manual focus, that's something that you're going to have to deal with. All right. And we have, I mean, ghosty edges, it's the same, except the middle of the image is not as sharp as it was. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even take that image. I wouldn't submit that image to somebody if it had to have been an important image and I had to sharpen the mess out of it. Like I would not send that to a bride or anything like that if it was just like a secondary image. If it's a primary image like the kiss or the ring shot or whatever, and I don't have anything else, but I wouldn't shoot this lens at 135, which is crazy because a lens that came out around the same time, the 135 f2 prime lens, is a lot sharper, and a lot of people swear by that lens. But it is a prime lens. Prime lenses are easier to make than zoom lenses and easier to keep high image quality. All right, so at 200 millimeters, and yes, it's at 200 millimeters technically, and a lot of people will be using it at this focal distance. And I see just a little bit of, I want to say magenta, just a taddest bit of either magenta or green. It's like right in between, but easily clean upable in Photoshop, Lightroom, or whatever. It's like the smallest amount, which is really, really good to see. Let's go out to the corners here at 200 millimeters, and wow, the sharpness just dropped off the planet. The ghosting is still kind of there, but the sharpness just dropped off the planet. So now we're in Lightroom with the 70-200 RF L lens, and something just to compare these two lenses over a 30-year difference. I just wanted to see the sharpness difference between the 80-200 and the 70-200 RF L lens. And so when we zoom here to 100% at 200 millimeters, 2.8, and I'm only going to do this at 2.8. I don't see any reason to do anything else. When you stop it down, they tend to get sharper anyway. But at 200, at 2.8 with the RF L lens, I mean, you're not going to get any better than this. This is not the premium sharpness for 200 millimeters specifically, but for zoom lenses, this is pretty much as good as you're going to get. And then as we move off to the center here, going off to the edges here, a little bit of a drop in sharpness from my results, but it's still really good. Lenses tend to get, less sharp when you go off to the edges here. Now let's go to Let's see, 135. 135 is good. A little bit less than 200, which is good because most people won't be using this directly at 135. They're probably going to be using the 200 millimeter in a lot more. It's just like a smidge less sharp, but like I said, this is probably some of the best you're ever going to get on any camera lens. Let's go off to the edges here, and it's pretty much the same story with the edges, just a smidge difference. But like I said, this is like, for zoom lenses, this is some of the best you're going to get. Zoom lenses are not easy to make, guys. All right, going to we're at 104. I wanted to like equivocate like 105 millimeters because I like the Sigma 105 millimeter 1.4, but at 2.8 at 104 millimeters, which is going to assume for reference sake this is 105 millimeters, it's good. It's good. Like I said, best image quality that you're probably going to see out of any zoom lens at 104 millimeters, 105 millimeters. Same thing in the edges, just a little bit of degradation on the quality on the edges. And let's go to 84 millimeters, which is my handiwork of getting to 85 just by hand. And zooming back into the middle here, we got a good showing. I'm pretty sure this lens is consistent from 85 pretty much to 200. It's the same story, the same amount of sharpness, the same sharpness from edge to edge. It's not the most sharp lens I've ever held in my hand. Most of the primes in the RF series are going to be a little bit sharper here because they're primes, but in reference to everything, the only thing that would give me hang up on this 70 to 200 RFL lens is the 135. And the 135 millimeter versus the 135 on the 80 to 200, it's, like I said, it is both the lens's weak spots. On the 80 to 200, 135 is not a good spot to be photographing around. Same thing on the 70 to 200 RFL lens. It's just a little bit less sharpness than all the other focal distances that I highlighted in this review. But also you have on the 80 to 200, it's a lot weaker in the corners. And that's just, it was one of the first of its kind. But as far as the differences in the sharpness in the 80 to 200 to the 70 to 200, and if it's worth buying over the newer RF 70 to 200, that's up to you guys. I'm not going to tell you guys, but here are the results for you to find out yourself. So in review of the image quality test, when you zoom in, you lose image quality on the corners. I don't know what was happening at 135, but if you can avoid it, try not to shoot around 135. That's a weak spot for this lens. When you start to zoom in, you do see a little bit of chromatic aberration, usually green, but it was so minimal that, you know, it could be cleaned up. Also, you saw some ghosting on the wider end at 80, 85 millimeters, but that can be cleaned up relatively well because it's still decently sharp in the corners. In the middle, it's pretty good for almost a 40-year-old lens, especially on the dizzying heights of the 45 megapixel R5. This lens is really for the people who want to get the 70 to 200 range, but can make some sacrifices. They don't have to have the cleanest looking video, but they get the light transmission of the 2.8. And sometimes the 2.8 is worth it over the mind-blowing image quality of the RF 70 to 200 and the mind-blowing price of the 70 to 200. So these are some things to keep in mind. These are the people that are going to purchase this lens. Somebody that needs something cheap, not the best image quality, but it's decent. It can do events, weddings, may not be able to do sports as well, but it can do sports. You can get away with some images, right? Won't be able to shoot as fast as the RF lenses on the RF bodies, but it's decent. It's a workhorse. It gets the job done, and it's a doable workhorse, and it's a tank. It'll get the images off, and it won't cause you any issues that you might have thought coming into this video. It won't really give you too many focus issues if you're not trying to always keep the eye in focus, but it does get the eye in focus. It's essentially a third-party lens with a little bit of quirkiness, but you do get some benefits from the newer mirrorless full frame bodies that are pro level. I wouldn't try this on a crop frame sensor or a crop frame censored RF S lens type body. Also, please keep in mind, guys, that, like I said, it could have some optical problems. It could be damaged, but nobody can fix it unless you can find somebody who specializes in it that you trust. And there's not a lot of people like that around nowadays. So beware when buying this lens, but this is the Magic Drain Pipe, and it's the Magic Drain Pipe for a reason. It's still contending with some of the 7200s of today, and it doesn't even have 70 to 79 millimeters. So that's something to think about. It's still, in my opinion, a good lens, and I really like this lens. So in this small test, I did a in-camera IBUS, in-camera stabilization, and a non-in-camera stabilization with this lens. I don't know if it made that big of a difference. I really can't see that big of a difference. Maybe a little bit of jitteriness was cleaned up, but it's definitely not going to be as good as a lens with IS in it, working together with the IBUS in your camera. Also, here is a chart I found on a great website. Links in the description below. But this came from Popular Photography Magazine in 1994, I believe. And this gives you a really big rundown on the sharpness test that was remotely similar to my test that I had gotten. But read it and you can find out so much more about this lens in extreme details.
If you're looking to get into older lenses that are still just as quality, good, and more affordable. I mean, I'm a photographer, barely. I shoot a little bit, and I would highly consider getting this lens because it's more in budget. However, as you can see, it is significantly larger, and there is a bit more weight to it. So, yeah, it was fun shooting. Can't wait to see the images from both. And let me know what you guys think in the comments. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more.
Awesome. Perfect. And that is a wrap.